She had not traveled 2 days on the train from Toronto to be told she wasn't needed. "I don't require a wife," James Dunfield said, standing at the edge of his own porch like a man who hadn't yet decided whether to let her inside. "I require someone who can manage a household. Cook, keep accounts, not ask too many questions." Daphne Sorrell set her trunk down on the weathered boards and looked at him steadily. She had spent 2 years managing a ward of 40 patients at St. Michael's Hospital. She had once talked a man through setting his own broken finger because the attending physician was occupied elsewhere. She did not frighten easily, and she had learned not to waste breath on men who said alarming things while meaning something else entirely. "Then I suggest we stop wasting daylight," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, she wouldn't call it warmth, but a flicker of something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like reluctant consideration. He turned without a word and went inside, and she took that as an invitation. The farmhand, a compact, sunburnt man named Archie, who had met her at the station in the town of Birch Hollow, Saskatchewan, had warned her on the 3-mile drive out. He had the particular way of warning people that came from genuine concern, and the knowledge that the warning would be ignored. "Mr. Dunfield's not easy," Archie had said, looking straight ahead at the road. "Hasn't been, going on 4 years now." Daphne had understood then the same way she'd understood many things in nursing, not because she was told directly, but because 4 years was a specific amount of time for a man to still be a certain way. She hadn't asked what had happened 4 years ago. She hadn't needed to. The Dunfield farmhouse sat on a quarter section of land in the Qu'Appelle Valley, and it was larger than she'd expected and quieter than she'd thought possible. Not a summer quiet, not the kind that came from peace, but the kind that came from the deliberate removal of everything that made noise. There were chairs at the kitchen table, but only one had the worn look of regular use. There was a coat hook by the door with 1 coat on it and 3 empty hooks beside it, and she didn't look at those for long. She found the kitchen in reasonable order and the storeroom in excellent condition, which told her something about the man. He wasn't careless, he was reduced. There was a difference, and she'd seen it before in patients who had given up on recovering without quite deciding to stop breathing. She made supper. Roast chicken from a bird she'd found in the yard, potatoes from the root cellar, bread from starter she found in a crock on the shelf. When James came in from the barn at 6:30, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the table for just a moment before he sat down. He ate without speaking. She ate without filling the silence. "You've done this before," he said, when the plate was nearly empty. It wasn't praise so much as an observation. "I come from a large family," she said. "Someone had to." He nodded once and went to bed. Archie, passing through the kitchen later for the lamp he'd left behind, caught her eye with an expression that she'd have called encouragement if it weren't so carefully neutral. "That's more than he said to the last one," he offered. "How many have there been?" she asked. 3, Archie said, "before you." He left before she could ask how long each had lasted. The first week passed the way a hard winter passes, not quickly, but with a certain inevitability that made counting the days less useful than simply moving through them. James Dunfield was a man of rigorous routine. He was out of the house before light and back only for meals and the brief interlude of sleep. He gave her a written list on the second morning in handwriting that was precise and economical: kitchen, garden, mending, accounts, and said nothing further about expectations. She did everything on the list, and then she went further, because the farm needed further. The kitchen garden had been planted but not tended. She cleared the bindweed and amended the soil with composted manure from the barn, working until her back ached and her hands were chapped from the prairie wind. She reorganized the root cellar by season and expiry, a skill that had once applied to medical supply rooms, and transferred without difficulty. She found the account books in a desk drawer and opened them, and then sat very still for several minutes. Archie found her at the desk the following afternoon. "Those books," he said carefully. "Mr. Dunfield generally keeps those himself." "Mr. Dunfield hasn't balanced them since spring of last year," she said pleasantly, "and his seed supplier has been billing him for a grade of wheat that doesn't match the delivery receipts I found in the bottom drawer." Archie stared at her. "You found that?" "It's there to be found," she said, "if you look." He sat down heavily on a kitchen chair and rubbed the back of his neck. "Lord," he said quietly. She kept working. The confrontation came on the 9th day. James came in from the barn in the middle of the afternoon, which he never did, and found her at the desk with the account books spread open and her notes laid out beside them. He stopped in the doorway. She heard the change in his breathing before she turned. "Those are private," he said. "You put accounts on the list," she said, turning to face him. Her voice was level. She had used this voice on men twice his size who had decided they didn't want their dressings changed. "I did the work you assigned me. If you'd like me to set it aside, I will. But before I do, you should know that you've been paying $230 a year above what you owe on seed. And at the current shortfall, you'll struggle to meet your autumn note in less than 18 months. Silence. James stood in the middle of the kitchen, with his jaw tight and his hands at his sides. He was looking at her in a way he hadn't looked at her before. Not through her, not around her, but at her. "How do you know how to read a ledger like that?" he said. "My father ran a dry goods store in Barrie," she said. "He kept me out of school twice a year to do inventory." She paused. "I also kept supply accounts for a 40-bed ward for 2 years. It's the same arithmetic." He said nothing for a long moment, then, "Show me." It was the first time he had asked her for anything. She pulled her chair over and he pulled up the other chair, close enough that she could smell cold air and hay and honest work. And for 90 minutes he listened, not politely, not as a man enduring a presentation. He listened the way a man listens when the information matters, asking sharp, specific questions, leaning forward at figures she hadn't yet reached. When they finished, he sat back and looked at the corrected page. "I'll write to Davies in the morning," he said. "The seed supplier. He's been shorting the grade since autumn." "I've already drafted it," she said, and passed it across. He read it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. She couldn't quite call it a smile, but it was the direction of one. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. "You don't need to do all of this," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." He looked at her for a moment, and she looked back at him, and something settled between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the absence of hostility, which on this particular farm felt like a beginning. That evening at supper, he said, "The garden's coming in better." "Another 2 weeks for the peas," she said. "Good," he said. She learned about Rosalind from the postmistress in town. Daphne had gone to Birch Hollow to collect supplies and post the letter to the seed supplier, and she was at the general store counter when a woman in a gray dress touched her arm. "You're the Dunfield woman," the woman said, "the new one." Her name was Muriel Trent. She ran the telegraph office, and as far as Daphne could tell within 4 minutes of meeting her, approximately 1/3 of all information in the Qu'Appelle Valley. "Daphne Sorrell," she said, "for the moment." Muriel looked at her with sharp, not unkind eyes. "He didn't tell you, did he?" It wasn't a question. "He's not a man who tells things," Daphne said. "Rosalind died in childbed," Muriel said, without cruelty, the directness of a woman who believed that the kindest thing was accuracy. 4 years ago last March, the baby too, a boy. James delivered them himself because Dr. Ashmore was out on a call and didn't come back in time." She paused. "He's never forgiven himself for it. I don't think he knows that's what he's doing, but that's what he's doing." Daphne stood at the counter and paid for her flour and her thread and her paper. She carried her parcel to the wagon and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before she took the reins. He delivered them himself. She had known, walking through that farmhouse on the first day, that there was loss in James Dunfield's history. The extra coat hooks, the kitchen chair no one sat in, the way his eyes moved through a room without landing on anything. She had known the shape of it, the way nurses knew the shape of things, from evidence rather than statement. She had not known he had carried that particular weight. She clicked the horse forward and turned the wagon back toward the farm, and she did not allow herself pity. He would hate that, she was certain of it, but something else, something quieter, something that looked, if she examined it honestly, very much like understanding. The crack in the wall came on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she'd arrived. She was in the kitchen after supper, mending a shirt she'd found balled up behind the wardrobe with a tear across the shoulder seam. James came in from the barn later than usual, and he was holding his right hand against his thigh in a way she recognized. "Let me see," she said. "It's nothing." "It's a gash from a wire fence," she said. I can tell from where you're holding it. Sit down, please." He stood in the middle of the kitchen for a moment, with that familiar internal argument written across his face, and then he sat down. She got the boiled water and the carbolic from the shelf. She'd moved the carbolic to the shelf from the box under the stairs on her second day, for exactly this reason, and hadn't said anything about it, and she sat across from him and took his hand in both of hers. He flinched, not from pain, from being touched. She worked steadily, cleaning the cut without hurrying, and she felt him watching her hands the way people sometimes watched something they didn't quite believe was happening to them. The kettle ticked in the cooling. Outside, a nighthawk was hunting late. "You knew what you were doing the moment you saw it," he said. "I was a hospital nurse for 2 years," she said, "at St. Michael's in Toronto." "Why did you leave?" She tied off the bandage with neat, efficient turns. The new superintendent decided that women nurses should be restricted to female wards and domestic duties. She smoothed the ends flat. "I told him that was a remarkable position for a man whose appendix I had assisted in removing." He didn't appreciate the observation. James looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that was not wariness or carefully maintained distance. It was the expression of a man who had just been surprised into finding something funny, and who was slightly annoyed with himself for it. "You lost your position over that," he said. "I left my position over it," she said. "There's a difference." He looked down at his bandaged hand. "Rosalind always said things like that," he said quietly. "The difference between words." The kitchen held it. "She sounds like someone who knew what she meant," Daphne said carefully. "She always knew what she meant." He was quiet for a long moment. "I couldn't, when it happened." He stopped. His jaw worked once. "There was a lot of snow that March. Ashmore was out toward Grenfell. She said it wasn't time yet." He looked at the table. She was wrong. "You did everything right," Daphne said. "I didn't save them." "That's not the same thing." The silence was the kind that comes after a true thing has been said. James sat with it, and she let him sit with it, and eventually he stood and said "good night" in a voice that had gone quieter and less guarded than she'd heard it. She banked the fire and sat alone at the table for a long while after. The farm settled around her in the dark, prairie wind against the windows. Something had moved. She wasn't foolish enough to call it love, not yet, not even close, but something had shifted, and in a place as deliberately emptied as James Dunfield's life had become, a small thing shifting was something to attend to. She went to bed and told herself what she'd told herself on the train platform in Toronto, with her trunk in one hand and an address written on a folded paper in the other. "You go toward things, not away from them. That's what you do." The blight showed up in the 3rd week of June. It started at the north end of the field, a yellowing along the base of the stalks, a particular gray-brown discoloration that spread slowly outward from the center of each affected plant. James found it on a Monday morning and stood at the field's edge for a long time without speaking. "It'll take the whole quarter section," Archie said behind him, his voice flat with the particular flatness of a man who has seen crops fail before and knows exactly what it means. "Maybe more." "What kind is it?" Daphne asked. She was standing beside James, looking at the affected plants with the same focused attention she had once given to ward charts. "Rust," James said, "or something like it. Either way, it spreads." "Has Dr. Ashmore seen it?" James looked at her sideways. "He's the only man in 20 miles who's done any study of agricultural disease," she said evenly. "That's a practical question." James sent Archie to town. Dr. Ashmore arrived the following afternoon, assessed the north field for approximately 8 minutes, and declared it stem rust. "Burn the affected section," he said. "Pray the wind doesn't carry it." Daphne stood at the edge of the group. James, Archie, 2 neighboring farmers who'd come to see, and said nothing. But that evening she spread every agricultural text she could find from the desk drawer across the kitchen table and read until midnight. The pattern was wrong for stem rust. The rust she'd read about spread outward uniformly. This was spreading along water channels. She could see it in the field layout, following the low ground where rainwater pooled. It wasn't airborne. It was moving through the soil. She told James the next morning. He listened in the same way he'd listened to the account books. Alert, skeptical, asking precise questions. "Ashmore's been farming this valley for 30 years, he said. Ashmore looked at the field for 8 minutes, she said. I've been looking at it for 2 days. And I've read everything in this about agricultural blight, and the spread pattern doesn't match stem rust. It matches a soil-borne fungal infection, which means burning the top growth won't stop it. You'd need to treat the soil. With what? Lime, she said, and copper sulfate where you can afford it, and drainage trenches along the low edges to interrupt the water path. James stared at her. Where did you learn that? From your bookshelves, she said. You have a 1898 edition of Canadian Agricultural Review that describes 2 outbreaks in Manitoba with identical spread patterns. I've marked the pages. He looked at the marked pages for a long time. Ashmore will say I'm wasting money digging drainage on a rust infection, he said. Ashmore may be right, she said, and if he is, you've lost a week of digging. But if I'm right and you burn the top growth, you'll lose the field for 3 years while the fungus cycles through the soil. Silence. The neighboring fields, James said slowly. McIvor and Pierce. Their low ground connects to ours. Yes, she said, which is why I think you should talk to them before you do anything. He looked at her across the kitchen table, and in that look was something she'd been watching develop for 3 weeks now, something that had started as reluctant assessment and was becoming, quietly and against what seemed like his better judgment, something considerably warmer. All right, he said, we'll try it your way. The drainage trenches took 5 days. James, Archie, and both the McIvor and Pierce families worked them, with Daphne mapping the low ground and marking the trench lines with stakes while James organized the labor. Dr. Ashmore came back on the 3rd day, looked at the work with an expression that managed to convey skepticism without committing to it directly, and said nothing useful. The lime and copper sulfate went in on the 6th day. On the 12th day, the spread stopped. James stood at the field's edge in the morning light and looked at the north quarter, the affected section contained, the healthy stalks beyond it straight and green, and he didn't say anything for a long time. The McIvor field held too, Archie said, coming up beside him. Will McIvor just sent word. James nodded once. Daphne was at the garden when he found her, pulling weeds with the methodical patience she'd brought to everything on this farm. He stood at the garden gate. You were right, he said. The book was right, she said without looking up. I just read it. Daphne. She looked up then. He was standing with his hat in his hands, and the morning was bright and sharp and still, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not gratitude, though it contained gratitude. Something underneath gratitude. Something that lived in a deeper place. I've been letting things go, he said. The accounts, the blight, he stopped. Started again more carefully. This farm was Rosalind's as much as mine. She had plans for it. I stopped having plans. He looked down at his hat. I couldn't see what I was doing, or I could see it and I didn't care enough to stop. She waited. You care, he said. You care about this place, and you've been here less than a month. He met her eyes. I don't know how to explain what that does, to see someone care about something you'd almost let die. The garden was very still, wind across the grass, distant cattle. This is a good farm, she said quietly. The land's good, the bones are good. It just needed someone to stay long enough to pay attention. The other 3 left, he said, before you. I know. You haven't. No, she said, I haven't. He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought he was going to say something more, but instead, he put his hat back on and said, Supper's late tonight if that's all right. I want to check the McIvor fence line before dark. I'll keep it warm, she said. He nodded and turned to go, and then he stopped with his back still to her. We, he said. Not a sentence, just the word, standing on its own. She understood. We, she said. He went. She turned back to her weeding, and she let herself smile at the ground where he couldn't see it, and she stayed with the feeling for a moment. The particular feeling of a thing that is beginning to become what it was always going to be, if you were patient enough to wait for it. The letter from her sister Helen arrived in mid-July, forwarded from the Toronto address Daphne had left behind. Helen wrote the way she'd always written, directly, with the confident affection of someone who had known you your entire life and saw no reason to be careful about it. I heard from Mrs. Callister at the church that you've gone to Saskatchewan, Helen had written. I looked Saskatchewan up on a map and then I looked it up again because I thought I must have misread it. Daphne, it is enormous and far away. Is the man decent? Is the house sound? Are you eating properly? If the answer to any of these is no, write back immediately and I will come and retrieve you. If the answer is yes, write back anyway, because I miss you and I want to know everything. Daphne sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. She thought about the hospital ward, the antiseptic smell of it, the noise of it, the particular loneliness of being competent in a place that had decided to need her less. She thought about the evening she'd answered the advertisement in the Toronto Witness, sitting at the boarding house table with a stub of pencil, and a feeling she hadn't known what to call at the time. She knew what to call it now. It was the feeling of a door in a room with no windows. She picked up her pen and wrote back to Helen. The man is decent, she wrote. The house is sound. I am eating exceptionally well. The land is extraordinary, flat and enormous and full of sky in a way that is frightening and beautiful in equal measure. And I have discovered that I don't mind frightening when the beautiful is right there alongside it. She paused. The man is not easy. He has had a hard 4 years and he carries it the way very private people carry things, quietly, and in a way that takes up all the available space. But he is beginning, I think, to put some of it down. I am trying to be here when he does. I think I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I know that sounds like something you'd expect me to say. I also know you know the difference between when I'm saying it to be convincing and when I'm saying it because it's true. This is the second kind. She sealed the letter and went to start supper, and she was still thinking about what she'd written when James came through the door at 7, smelling of hay and summer dust, and looked at the table, and then looked at her. You made the pie, he said. It came out differently than she expected, not as an observation, but as something softer, something almost unpracticed. Rhubarb from the garden, she said. It's been ready for a week. Roslyn used to. He stopped. I know, she said, without making anything of it. Sit down, it's ready. He sat, he ate, and somewhere in the middle of the meal, the space between them, always measured, always maintained at a careful and necessary distance, became something she could only describe as companionable. Not romantic, not yet, but warm. A fire that two people were sitting close enough to both feel. One evening in August, without planning to, she asked him about the child. They were on the porch after supper. She'd started sitting out there on warm evenings, and he'd started staying out there with her, though neither of them had said anything about it. And he was looking out at the field with the particular expression she'd come to know as his mode of quiet thought. What would he have been named, she said. The baby. James was very still. I'm sorry, she said. You don't have to. Thomas, he said, after her father. She didn't say anything. She let it stand. She'd already chosen it, he said. She told me the day she was certain. She said it like she was handing me something to hold on to. He paused. I didn't understand what she meant until after. She sounds like she knew, Daphne said. She always knew. He was quiet for a long time. The nighthawks were out again, the sky going copper along the horizon. She would have liked you, he said finally. That sounds like an odd thing to say. It doesn't, she said. She had no patience for people who did things halfway. He stopped. Something moved across his face. She would have appreciated that you read a 4-year-old agricultural review and dug drainage trenches on the strength of it. Daphne made a sound that was, unexpectedly, a laugh, a real one. James turned and looked at her, and his expression in that moment was something she had not seen there before. Unguarded, present. The expression of a man who has found himself, without quite planning for it, back in the company of someone alive. She would have been right, Daphne said. She usually was, he said. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, and neither of them spoke much, and it was the best kind of quiet, not empty, not held at a distance but shared, the way warmth is shared when two people are sitting close enough to both feel it. He came in from the barn on a September morning and found her at the desk, writing, and he stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she looked up. When you answered that advertisement, he said, what did you think you were going toward? She considered it honestly. Not something specific, she said. I'd spent 2 years being told that what I was good at wasn't wanted. I needed somewhere that would take what I had to offer. She met his eyes. I didn't let myself expect anything beyond that. Expectation gets you in trouble. "And now?" he said. The kitchen was still. Light through the east window, the good September light. "Now," she said, "I think I've found something I wasn't expecting." He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her, and he did something she had not seen coming. He put his hand against her face. The way you hold something you are afraid to drop, and he looked at her with all of the past 4 years in his eyes, and also something that was not the past at all. "I don't know how to do this right," he said. "No one does," she said. "You just decide to, and then you learn." "I've been deciding," he said, "for a while now." "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment, his hand still warm against her face. Outside, the field was gold with September. The sky went on forever, in every direction, the enormous indifferent Saskatchewan sky, holding everything beneath it with the same vast impartial grace. "Stay," he said. Not a question, not quite. More like a man saying the word he had meant to say for a long time, and had been waiting until he was sure he meant it in the right way. "I'm already staying," she said. A year after Daphne Sorrell stepped off the train at Birch Hollow station with a trunk and a carpetbag and an address written on a folded piece of paper, the Dunfield farm was everything it had always had the bones to be. The fields ran full and productive. The accounts were balanced every month with the precision of someone who had once kept track of 40 beds worth of medical supplies, and saw no reason to be less diligent about wheat. The kitchen garden was producing more than they could use, and she'd started trading the surplus with Muriel Trent's household in exchange for the kind of social information that proved consistently useful. Archie had been given the foreman's responsibilities that had always been his in practice, and he still addressed Daphne as ma'am, with an emphasis that contained everything he was too reserved to say directly. Muriel Trent came by for tea on the first Friday of every month, and had proven, over those months, to be exactly the kind of friend who told you the truth even when you hadn't asked for it, which was the only kind Daphne had ever valued. The McIvor and Pierce families came by regularly. The drainage the neighboring farms had installed together had held through a wet spring. Will McIvor told anyone who would listen that Daphne had saved 3/4 sections of wheat that summer, which was an exaggeration, but not by as much as it might have been. Dr. Ashmore, for his part, had sent a very short and very carefully worded letter acknowledging that the spread pattern in the north field had been more consistent with fusarium than with stem rust. Daphne had read it twice and handed it to James, who had read it once, set it down, and said, "I'll frame it if you'd like." She had laughed and told him absolutely not. And on an ordinary morning in October, with the harvest in, and the accounts reconciled, and the first real cold of autumn laying itself down across the valley, Daphne sat at her desk writing to Helen, and James came in from outside and stopped behind her chair and read over her shoulder for a moment. "You're telling her about the pie," he said. "She asked for the recipe," Daphne said. "Apparently she tried rhubarb in July and it didn't set right." He made a sound that was fully and unguardedly a laugh, the laugh of a man who had recovered the use of it and was no longer surprised to hear it come from himself. He put his hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered it with hers without thinking about it, the way you reach for things that have become familiar. "James," she said. Are you happy?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man taking an honest question seriously. Outside, the sky was doing what the Saskatchewan sky always did, being enormous and clear and entirely indifferent to the lives beneath it, holding them all the same. "Yes," he said simply, without qualification or caveat. She pressed her hand over his and turned back to her letter, and outside the valley stretched out golden and vast and indifferent and magnificent, exactly as it had on the morning she'd arrived, exactly as it always would be, holding everything beneath it with the same enormous grace, the grief that didn't end, and the life that went on, and the stubborn, particular joy of two people who had each been going toward something without knowing what it was, and had found, against all reasonable expectation, that they had been going toward each other.